Thank you, colleagues. We're going to move on to the next item of business, which is moving of a business motion to Mr. Day. So the next item is consideration of business motion 21307 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a timetable for the Stage 3 consideration of the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill. Can I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And no member has indicated they wish to speak on the motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 21307 be agreed. Are we agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. So turning now to proceedings on the Fgm Bill, members should have with them the bill as amended at stage 2, the marshalled list and the grouping of amendments. I would just remind members that we'll sound the division bell for the first division of the afternoon. At that point, there will be a 30-second vote. Thereafter, there will be a 1-minute vote if there should be a division following a debate and a grouping. Any member who wishes to speak to any amendment should press their button to speak immediately after I call the grouping. So we'll now turn to the marshalled list, and I call Amendment 1. This is on provision of practical support. I call Amendment 1 in the name of the Minister, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. I would remind members that if Amendment 1 is agreed to, then I cannot call Amendments 2 and 3 as they will be preempted. I call the Minister, Christina Mcguire.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. At stage 2, I indicated that I would bring forward amendments at stage 3 to ensure the bill reflects the importance of ensuring that women and girls who are seeking an Fgm protection order receive appropriate and necessary support from frontline bodies. These are intended to meet the spirit of the committee's work and the view they expressed at both stage 1 and 2. Since stage 2, I've taken forward discussions with frontline third sector providers and statutory bodies about the bill as amended. Third sector bodies submitted a joint letter, and Social Work Scotland have written one too, and I hope members have had a chance to look at those. I want to pay tribute at the outset to the important work the Equality and Human Rights Committee have done throughout this process, Presiding Officer, to ensure that we have the best possible legislation that will protect women and girls, prevent Fgm from happening in the first place. Although I disagreed with Oliver Mundel's amendment at stage 2, I completely understood what he was trying to achieve in pressing them, and I understand the committee's strong desire to ensure that women and girls receive appropriate support and that their identities are not disclosed given the particularly sensitive and personal issues that arise in relation to Fgm, and the importance of ensuring that they are protected. I want to thank Oliver Mandel for engaging with this issue. I am sorry that he cannot be here today to speak to his own amendments, but hopefully I will do the spirit behind them, the spirit of what he was trying to do behind them. I hope I'll give them some justice today. At stage 2, I indicated that I would bring forward amendments to deliver on the committee's aspiration in a sensible and balanced way. In doing so, I have sought to address stakeholder concerns that court-designed and directed support within the Fgm protection order would be so precise and directive it could risk removing the benefits of a professional assessment of need and tailored support. This assessment is best carried out by those who provide complex support packages on a day-to-day basis. Our amendments therefore place the responsibility for determining appropriate support in the hands of frontline professional experts. This provides for a more balanced and sensible approach that starts from the basis that public bodies themselves, in partnership with the third sector organisations and with the needs of the individual at its heart. These people, I think, are best placed to identify and deliver the package of support that's necessary. That is why my amendments first allows the court to require a public body to carefully consider what support is needed and then require the public body to provide that considered support as appropriate and as reasonably as practicable. They ensure that vulnerable women and girls do not have to repeatedly attend court to have their support requirements varied, which I am sure that everyone will agree is not desirable. I note that Oliver Mundel's amendments to stage 3 provide for a power for ministers to issue guidance to the courts in carrying out the duties in a case. This is not something that ministers would ever do so, as it would run counter to the independence of the judiciary. Our amendments respect both the proper role of the courts in these matters and its judicial independence from ministers. Oliver Mundel's amendments provide for the court to name an appointed person to oversee the order. I understand that the reason for this may be to prevent repeated court trips to vary the order as support needs to change. However, I can hopefully reassure the Chamber today, and Ms Davison, who has taken forward Oliver Mundel's amendments, that repeated court trips to tweak support packages will also be ruled out in my approach. I have looked carefully at those brought forward by Mr Mandel, which I do think are needed, and I worry they could potentially cause confusion and tension between the protected person and the public body supporting them, meaning that despite mandating someone to do this, the court continues to have to step in and resolve any issues. We can all trust, I hope, our public bodies to make the right decisions and to provide support that has the needs of the protected person at its heart. But I want to be clear with the Chamber that the bill as a whole will provide guidance in relation to appropriate support too. Our statutory guidance at section 2 and 3 will spell out clearly to the public body who must have regard to it, the seriousness of the order and the steps that they should have regard to in complying with it. In light of what I said above, it should be noted that our guidance is expressly prevented from applying to the courts. I think that Mr Mandel has acknowledged these issues here through his provision to modified subsection 5A by regulations. However, we have an opportunity to get this bill right today and would respectfully submit that my amendments are a better way forward. I believe that our proposals meet the spirit behind Oliver Mandel's amendments at stage 2 and the committee's majority support for them, in reinforcing the provision of support, but in a sensible and balanced way, ensuring that vulnerable women and girls who require support can access the right support in the right way, and that their needs are at the very heart of the process, that once the court has done its job, our public services are then freed to do theirs. As I said at stage 2, we all agree on the importance of supporting women and girls and their families, where there is a current or future risk of FGM. It is certainly right that those who need support should have access to it. As you know, my entire approach to tackling FGM through our strategy, through our preventative work in communities and through this Act is to support vulnerable girls to ensure a person-centred approach. I think you would all agree that I am utterly committed to that, and we all want all we want to do is to ensure that we have good and competent legislation. That is our collective aspiration for any legislation which is passed in this chamber. And, Presiding Officer, I move Amendment 1 in my name.
Thank you very much, Minister. And can I call on Ruth Davison to speak to Amendment 2 and the other amendments in this group?
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The amendments tabled in the name of my colleague Oliver Mandel in this grouping are designed to address a number of practical and technical concerns that were raised at stage 2 when an amendment on the provision of direct practical support to those protected by an FGM order was passed by a majority of members at the committee. At the outset, we acknowledge that the government has brought forward their own alternative amendments, and we recognise that those amendments, if passed, would represent an improvement on the bill as originally drafted. It is my colleague's belief that they don't give everything that the committee members were looking for, but he does recognise that they may be more practical for exactly the reasons that have just been outlined by the Minister. We are nevertheless still keen to explain to Parliament the reasons for the amendments laid down by my colleague, to thank all those who came and who gave evidence at the committee, and to demonstrate that the points that were raised in the committee by SNP members in particular have been listened to. So in terms of the amendments themselves, Amendment 1, as the Minister has clarified, it clarifies that any direction from the courts would be limited to public bodies as defined under the 1998 Scotland Act. There had been concerns at stage 2 that unfair or unreasonable burdens could be placed on third sector organisations, and that had not been the intention. On Amendment 3, makes clear that any support outlined may be immediate or ongoing. Amendment 5 would allow for the courts to appoint a suitable individual to take charge of arrangements moving forward, and would allow a mechanism for any support to be reviewed without returning to court. Again, that had been a specific concern that had been raised at stage 2. I also know that our colleague across the chamber, Rafi, was keen to see more detailed examples of what such support might include on the face of the bill, and this has been covered in Amendment 6, which would have been focused on health, housing, financial support and education as a starting point. Amendments 7, 8 and 9 speak to the protections we seek for the individual at the heart of any decision, and it offered direction to the court, and it gave scope to ministers to issue guidance. So that was the rationale for these amendments being tabled. However, we recognise that the Minister has herself taken on board a great number of the concerns that were raised at stage 2. We thank her for that, and to that end I seek permission not to move the amendments in the name of Oliver Mandel, and to say that we will support the government's amendments in their stead.
Thank you very much. I call John Finney to be followed by Angela Constance. John Finney.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Green Party aren't represented in the Equality and Human Rights Committee, but we're very grateful for the work that they do and monitor it closely and are supportive of the government bill. I had involvement in this issue through previous involvement in the Equalities Committee and in the Justice Committee, and I'm aware of the sensitivities around and the perniciousness of the practice. And we, in each of these occasions where I was previously involved, we called on the expertise of many people. And this bill, as I understand, is about strengthening the protections, and I don't think there's any doubt that that's what everyone has sought to do. I should declare my interest as a member of the cross-party group on men's violence against women and girls, and the role that Scottish Women's Aid are playing in informing previous discussions on this is important, as is the various other groups in Gender, Amina, Shahilya and Shakti. And of course, reference has been made by the Minister to the letter from Social Work Scotland. I think we ignore at our peril the wisdom of the practitioners on this particular issue there, and when they talk about, I quote here from the letter from Scottish Women's Aid signed by these groups I mentioned, and indeed many others, including academics, when they talk about unforeseen consequences, undermining the efficacy of the bill, and will prove harmful to victims and survivors, I think we have to pay heed. Given the comments of Ms Davison, I wouldn't propose to say much more than that, but other than entirely supportive of the Minister's Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Finney. I call Angela Constance to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I wanted to speak in support of Amendment 1 and 10 in the name of the Minister today. I'm a member of the Equalities and Human Rights Committee, and these amendments seek to address some of the difficulties caused by some amendments as discussed by Ms Davison in terms of what happened at stage 2. And it's fair to say that committee was united in agreeing that endeavours to include practical support in FGM protection orders to reduce ongoing risk and harm were based on the very best of intentions, but we were divided on the practical effect and impact of Mr Mandel's proposition. And I do nonetheless very much welcome the position taken by Ruth Davison today on behalf of Mr Mandel, and I would like to put on record that Mr Mandel was a very diligent member of the Equalities and Human Rights Committee and cared deeply about the passage of this bill, and I think genuinely sought, despite our differences, to make it the best possible legislation. I come to this bill as someone who has many years of frontline experience in assessing vulnerable people or those at risk or those who present a risk. I've made many applications and recommendations to courts, to tribunals and to parole boards. Admittedly, that frontline experience is somewhat old now, over a decade. But those of us with this experience will have wrestled with the very delicate balance between the responsibilities, the competencies and the expertise between the courts on the one hand and service providers on the other. And what the Minister's amendments are trying to ensure is that when the courts impose duties, that they are actually based on assessed need and professional judgment. Presiding Officer, John Finney has already drawn to Chamber's attention that the correspondence that committee received on behalf of Scottish Women's Aid, signed by other organisations, including Shakti's Women's Aid, Multicultural Family Base, Dundee International Women's Centre, Sahilya, Amina, the Muslims Women's Resource Centre, and as he said, and I think that has been acknowledged by others, we will do well to pay heed to those services and workers who have the current frontline experience of trying to protect women and girls at risk of FGM. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Constance. I call Alex Cole-Hamilton to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I won't say very much at all, just to echo what other members have said about the intent of Oliver Mandel's amendments at stage 1, which I was, or stage 2 rather, which I was quite happy to support, imperfect as they were and as he admitted they were. However, I do think the Scottish Government have done a great deal of work to bring parties together to discuss opposition plans to ameliorate the concerns that we had at stage 2, and so I'm happy to support the Government in this regard.
Thank you very much. I call Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've not got a lot to add to what my colleagues have already said, particularly Angela Constance here, I think, summed it up pretty well. I do rise to support Amendments 1 and 10 in the name of the Minister. I welcome as well Ruth Davidson's approach today, and I think she did sum up where Oliver Mandel was coming from, and the fact that the government amendments have captured perhaps where he was trying to go. There was concerns that I shared along with others around some of the risks that were presented at stage 2 about you know, the support being so precise and directive that it could minimise the benefits of a professional assessment and tailored approach, and also those complex support packages that we know is in place. But I think in the spirit of all things just now in the current climate, I welcome the Conservative approach to these amendments today.
Thank you very much. And can I call on the Minister to wind up in this section?
Yeah, I'll not take a lot of time either, Presiding Officer. I want to just put on record my grateful thanks to Oliver Mandel and Miss Davison for bringing forward their position today. It's incredibly helpful when we work together like this. Everybody in the Chamber's drawn attention to the letter that was sent in from the organisations, and these organisations are the ones who do that day-to-day work in really complex situations. But I would quite like to just again, you know, reiterate my commitment that when we formulate the guidance for this bill, because part of it is you know, formulating that statutory guidance, that this collegiate approach that we've taken with the committee, with stakeholders and with other members across the chamber will be absolutely open as well. John Finney raised a few points too from the letter as well, and he talked about these people are the experts. I think we should always remember that the stakeholders who do this every day are the experts, and Angela Constance talked about getting that balance right between the competency of the court and statutory bodies and their duties, and should the duties be imposed, that they are based on assessed need. Both Alec Cole-Hamilton and Fulton McGregor came from that same position as well, about ensuring the complex needs in the persons at the heart of it. I think the whole core of this bill is to ensure that those little girls who could be at risk or have been victims, or their sisters or their mums, are protected through this bill, and I think we do ourselves proud today in moving this amendment forward and moving forward with the bill too. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And we'll move to the question. The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I'm going to call Amendments 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. And in the name of Oliver Mandel, I just want to confirm with Ms Davison they're not moved. Those are not moved. So we're now going to turn to Group 2. I'll just check that. Yeah, I'm a 10 since Group 2, Extraterritorial Jurisdiction. Can I call Amendment 4 in the name of the Minister in a group on its own? Minister to move and speak to Amendment 4.
Yep, thank you again, Presiding Officer. This is just a technical amendment that I've brought forward to make clear that an FGM protection order is not to be used to regulate matters unconnected to Scotland. While the bill currently reiterates the powers of the Sheriff to decline jurisdiction in such an instance, I consider it to be prudent to put the matter beyond any doubt. This technical amendment makes clear that in addition to FGM protection orders covering individuals ordinarily resident in Scotland, irrespective of whether they are a UK national or not, and irrespective of their immigration status, it can also cover any person within Scotland. This will ensure that an FGM protection order can be sought to protect even the most transient of visitors. By way of an example, say Police Scotland received credible intelligence that a non-UK national girl who's due to visit Scotland could be subjected to FGM when she goes home. Our bill will operate to allow them, while the girl is here, to seek an FGM protection order and in turn to protect that girl from future harm. This amendment does not change that, but it does put beyond a doubt that an FGM protection order cannot be used in relation to circumstances where there is no connection to Scotland. This is because it is important that we take a proportionate approach here, and jurisdiction should not be extended to unduly interfere in the affairs of sovereign nations and their citizens. We do not want to see a Scottish Sheriff issuing an FGM protection order in relation to a woman or girl, or indeed a potential perpetrator who has never set foot in Scotland, has no connection to this country and has never had any intention of coming here. It is not for us to interfere in the role of the state in keeping that woman or girl safe or holding that potential perpetrator of FGM to account. However, The bill remains deliberately drafted to provide for the robust protection of girls who may be taken from Scotland to be abused. Further, it is equally robust in tackling non-Scottish perpetrators who may come here to carry out this form of abuse, irrespective of whether a potential victim has been identified or not. This amendment makes no difference to that comprehensive approach, and I move Amendment 2 in my name.
Thank you very much, and I call on Ruth Davison.
Thank you. This is a technical amendment and we have no particular comments to make on the group's support, barring to say that we support the government's approach, which seems sensible, and we think that it does strengthen the existing provisions.
Thank you very much. So the question is that amendment... Sorry, does the Minister wish to add any further comments? The question is that Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 10 in the name of the Minister, just previously debated? Minister, to move formally.
Move formally.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. So turn to our last group, Group 3, Provision for Anonymity. Can I call Amendment 11 in the name of the Minister, grouped with the amendments as shown? And I would remind members that if Amendment 11 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendments 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16 as they will be preempted. Minister, to speak to and move Amendment 11. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Equality and Human Rights Committee and I both acknowledged at stage 2, we all know that individuals may wish to be made anonymous for a number of reasons, and the needs of the person who is seeking protection from harm will always be at the absolute heart of everything we are trying to do here. In the context of an FGM protection order, it is absolutely right that the court should consider that carefully and act in the best interest of the protected persons. At stage 2, the committee were sympathetic to undoubtedly well-intentioned amendments from Oliver Mandel, and I was concerned that the workability of those amendments and that they granted, and what they granted was, in effect, automatic anonymity for perpetrators. I explained that the courts do already have powers at their disposal to grant anonymity, and there is no evidence to suggest they do not take their duties in this regard seriously, and that they are well placed to decide how best to exercise such powers in a given case. However, the committee were sympathetic to the spirit of the amendments and noted and voted to amend the bill at stage 2 by inserting Oliver Mandel's provisions. As I have said, I understand why. My focus was then, and remains now, on ensuring that we have good and workable law that the courts are able to exercise, that works well for those it is designed to protect, and that does not have any unintended consequences. I welcome that Oliver Mandel has sought to fix some of the issues highlighted at stage 2, and as for Group 1, I have brought forward that I think are a balanced and sensible amendments to strengthen the bill in this area, and I hope that Parliament as a whole can get behind them. We are fortunate in this country. We have a highly skilled and professional judiciary, well used to ensuring the effective delivery of justice and the protection of persons' rights within that process. It is one of the reasons why we entrust these decisions of enormous personal importance to individuals, not to individuals, but to courts. As part of this, we need to allow those courts to act justly and react to the facts of a case before them. I continue to believe that the courts have sufficient powers at their disposal, that they are well capable of exercising them, and they do so seriously. However, I have also listened carefully to the views of the committee and again note the spirit and good intentions behind the original amendment. I have therefore brought forward an amendment which will insert new sections 5FA, 5FB and 5FC into the bill, which meet the spirit and provide workable law that will meet the purpose of this bill. Together, these will require the court to consider using a new power to make an anonymity order. This requirement will arise not only where it receives an application for an FGM protection order, but also where the need for one arises in other civil proceedings. My amendments do not set out the detail of the measures to be used, but rather the effect that they are to achieve. And they are more expansive in that they require the court to properly consider the whole issue of anonymity. I think that Oliver Mandel's amendments are still a bit too narrow and could constrain the court in their thinking and in the actions that they could take. My amendments also leave the existing powers of the court untouched underneath them, guarding against any unforeseen circumstances that may arise which are out with the ambit and allowing the court to fall back on the existing powers if need be. I want to refer to the point in the briefing by Scottish Women's Aid and Gender which raised a specific concern in relation to the government's amendments, namely around whether or not the courts would use this provision to make anonymity for perpetrators or potential perpetrators of FGM. They sought reassurances from the government on how this is intended to apply in practice, and I am very happy to now do so. There are sometimes occasions where the court has to consider whether to make a perpetrator anonymous. However, the courts are clear that they would only do that in order to protect the victim. The crime can often take place within small, close-knit communities and families, and naming the perpetrator in these situations will automatically mean that in doing so we identify the victim, or the victim's sibling, or even maybe a brave mother who has taken a stand in seeking protection for her daughter. Journalists call this the jigsaw identification process. That is why our amendments require the court to consider making anyone anonymous with the key test of the health, safety and well-being of the protected person, and only the protected person in mind. This is a critical point. Yes, anonymity can, in extreme circumstances, be granted to a perpetrator, but only where to do so otherwise would harm the victim, or where there is a chance that the case to protect the victim may not proceed at all. If we do not allow the courts to do this, then it may inhibit women and girls at risk from coming forward if they think that a family member, even when that family member is a potential perpetrator, could be identified publicly. As part of the implementation of the bill, we will work closely with the Judicial Institute of Scotland to ensure that the courts understand the particular dynamics of FGM and that they respond appropriately. This is the right balance that focuses on building capacity of the whole system to respond effectively, while respecting the fundamental independence and wisdom of the judiciary. We will, of course, continue to work with frontline experts and communities themselves to shape this approach. In general, my amendments tidy up a number of technical issues around who can make an application, how the protected person's views should be taken into account, and how the court deals with issues such as variation, which, if supported by Parliament, will make the final bill better law. This is reflective of the complexity of the process. We have tested our thinking with the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, the Faculty of Advocates, the Family Law Association and Just Right Scotland, who are specialist human rights lawyers who act with potential victims of FGM on a day-to-day basis. The Law Society of Scotland put in a submission yesterday supporting our approach. I will ensure that the court's decision-making continues to be underpinned by the needs of the protected person. That should be beyond any doubt, and in any way that is the way that it's right for that protected person too. Presiding Officer, I would urge the Chamber to support a sensible and balanced amendment and delete section 5CA from the bill, and I move Amendment 11 in my name. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And can I call on Ruth Davison to speak to Amendment 12 and the other amendment in this group?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This set of amendments in the name of Oliver Mandel aims to simplify the amendment around victim anonymity, and in particular we felt it more accurately captured what victims and survivors were asking for. Often they're looking for support and help, but they want to make sure that their details and those relating to the order do not make it into the public domain, which is not quite the same thing as anonymity. We believed that the new wording provided the necessary privacy and dignity that people were looking for and was self-evidently simpler and clearer than the Scottish Government's alternative. However, we do recognise the Minister's amendments, which again go further than she was willing to go at stage 2. And we welcome that, crucially, these would now move the issue of anonymity onto the face of the bill. As all speakers today have recognised, every member, official and minister has sought in good faith to act on behalf of some of Scotland's most vulnerable women and to give them the very best protection under the law that is in our power. Different methods perhaps, but the same motive and commitment. And with such assurances, as we've just heard from the Minister on anonymity, I'm content not to move the amendments in Oliver Mandel's name.
Thank you very much, Ms Davison. Can I call John Finney to be followed by Angela Constance?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The aim of this bill is to, and I quote here, strengthen the legal protection for women and girls at risk of female genital mutilation. And it then lays out how that's done. The very clear point that we have from the practitioners is that the courts already have the power of anonymity. We're all very familiar that people want things in the face of the bill for particular reasons, but one of the unintended consequences of that was the potential, and again quote from the letter, potential for promising perpetrators they will not be named. Now that's decidedly unhelpful. Equally unhelpful is when these organisations write and conclude by saying the potential for criminalising support efforts in organisations is particularly alarming. So I'm grateful for the amendments that the Ministers brought through that do strike the balance, and we will be supporting them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I call Angela Constance to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's worth reminding Chamber that the committee in its Stage 1 report on the issue of anonymity concluded, and I quote, that it strongly supports the principle that the views and wishes of victims and survivors should be paramount and central to court considerations, and the committee believes that anonymity on request is a reasonable expectation for victims of FGM and asks the Scottish Government to consider how this could be progressed. And the spirit of that, I think, is best reflected in the Minister's Amendments 11, 17 and 18. And in recognition that, you know, not one discrete bill will ever be the vehicle for wholesale legal change to our justice system, and that actually it is very problematic to try and carve out a separate set of arrangements for one particular set of victims and survivors. So I am pleased that the Minister has taken that recommendation forward as far as she can. I'm pleased that she has consulted an extensive range of stakeholders, including Just Right Scotland, who actually act for potential victims of FGM on a day-in, day-out basis. John Finney also reflected on the correspondence that we had received from practitioners in this field, and it is important to point out that courts must already withhold a person's identity in circumstances where the person faces a threat to life or limb, and further that they will do so where it is in the interests of justice to protect a party to proceedings from painful and humiliating disclosures of personal information where there is no public interest in doing so. These circumstances are a good description of FGM cases and offer significant protections already. And I've also, Presiding Officer, to conclude, I've listened very carefully to the Minister around her Amendment 17, which allows the court to consider making anyone anonymous, for example, a sibling, and that's very important. But crucially, as the Minister says, it can only make people, can only grant anonymity to those who are not the protected person if they have the health, safety and well-being of that person at the very heart of their considerations. And I've listened very carefully to her explanation that her amendments will indeed remove the prospects of perpetrators being granted anonymity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call Alex Cole-Hamilton to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Excuse me. And can I say at the outset, I absolutely echo a lot of what's been said by other members in this section and group of amendments. I was one of the members on the committee that supported Oliver Mandel's original attempt to get anonymity into the face of the bill. And we did so for very important reasons. That is, by definition, we're talking about communities where this is a massive cultural sensitivity, where fear of being named or being identified might act as an inhibitor to those who are victims or would be victims of female genital mutilation. And I understand, and we all recognise in the committee phase the imperfections in those amendments and the problems that Oliver Mandel's amendments at this stage were designed to rectify. However, I'd like to salute the government for moving a great distance once again to recognise the need for anonymity, a provision for anonymity within the bill. I think they get the balance right, and as such, we'll be supporting their amendments.
Thank you. I call Fulton McGregor.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I pressed my button to speak as much to keep the speakers, the list of speakers the exact same as from Group 1 as anything else, because I've not actually got a lot to add to what my colleagues have already said. Probably just to say, in addition to that, was that anonymity was probably the most pressing and key issue through Stage 1 and Stage 2, and we heard various approaches to that from witnesses during that time. We were, or I was, concerned about some of the suggestions put forward at Stage 2, which was agreed, but I think that Oliver Mandel himself and others who voted for it agreed that they weren't the finished article. So I do welcome the Minister's approach here, and I think that Oliver Mandel, who's obviously not here today, can be very happy with what he's achieved. And again, I'll just end by saying that I welcome the Conservative approach to today's amendments.
Thank you very much. And could I ask if the Minister wishes to make any comments by way of winding up?
Yeah, thank you. Again, Presiding Officer, again, my thanks to Ruth Davison and to Oliver Mandel for shifting so far on this. But I really want to reiterate that I did get the spirit of where Oliver Mandel wanted to go, and I hope that that's reflected in the work that we've done, because some of the key points that have been raised by others, John Finney said, mentioned the issue about not criminalising charity in third sector organisations. It was a key part of the work that we needed to do there, so I wanted to put that beyond absolute doubt, that these stakeholders, charities and third sector providers are the people that we will need to do that very detailed and expert work. Angela Constance raised the issue around about the views and the wishes of the victim at its heart. I can't reiterate that enough to say that that's what we attempted to do here, and the actions that we've taken, you know, along with the law, because she's absolutely right, this will not be just the law will make the difference here. It will be the work we do with stakeholders, that we work we do with guidance, and the work that we do with our FGM action plan. And she raised a really important issue here about ensuring that we have a broad enough scope in this amendment that allows for sibling sisters and maybe a mother or a grandmother to be protected too. Alec Cole-Hamilton brought up a really clear indication, and one of the reasons why this is such a sensitive and complex issue, and that is the fear of being named in a community. And that was raised with me over and over and over again, and I know that it was with the committee by communities and stakeholders. And again, we wanted to make sure we gave that commitment too, and along again with Philip McGregor and his comments and backing all of that up. This is about protection of women and girls, Presiding Officer, and I think we have done a good job today again to put them at the heart of this, but ensuring those siblings and those others are protected as well is a key aspect, and I thank everyone for their contributions.
Thank you very much, Minister. And the question is that Amendment 11 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And as I indicated earlier, that means that Amendments 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16 are preempted. So the next question is, or to call Amendment 17 in the name of the Minister. Can the Minister move? Moved. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 17 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 18, Minister, to move formally? Moved. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 18 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that ends formal consideration of amendments. Now, as members will be aware, at this stage in proceedings, I'm required under standing orders to decide whether or not, in my view, any provision of the bill relates to a protected subject matter, that is, whether it modifies the electoral system or franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, it does no such thing. Therefore, the bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. So on that note, we are going to pass on to the next item of business shortly, which will be a debate on stage 3 on motion 21279 in the name of Christina McKelvey. Just be a short pause before we do so.
The next item of business is Stage 3 debate on motion 21279 in the name of Christina McKelvey on the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill. May I ask those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Christina McKelvey to speak to and move the motion for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to open this Stage 3 debate on the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill. This is an important bill which will make a real difference to women and girls at risk of or who have experienced the abhorrent practice of FGM. Although we have had some debate around the provisions of the bill today, there is broad consensus, I believe, across the Chamber that this is the right thing to do. Like other forms of gender-based violence, FGM is a manifestation of power and the means of controlling the sexuality of women and girls. It is a form of violence against women and girls. And as Minister with responsibility for the Scottish Government work in this area, I am committed to preventing FGM in Scotland and ensuring that girls and women who are at risk of FGM are protected from harm. FGM, as we know, has been illegal here since 1985. What the FGM Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill seeks to do is to add to existing protections and improve the system response to women and girls at risk of harm. It is estimated that around 200 million girls and women across 30 countries have been subjected to FGM, and the prevalence of FGM in Scotland is difficult to estimate because of the hidden nature of the crime. A Scottish Refugee Council report in 2014 found that there are communities potentially affected by FGM every local authority area in Scotland, with the largest communities in Glasgow, Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Dundee. So this is not a new issue, and this government has been taking action. In 2016, we published a National Action Plan to prevent and eradicate FGM in Scotland, and I would like to pay tribute to Angela Constance, my colleague who started this journey. I'm merely finishing her first steps. The purpose of the action plan is to foster an environment of prevention in Scotland and to improve the welfare and quality of life of FGM survivors. We are taking steps to engage with communities, raise awareness and improve the response of frontline services. This bill meets our commitment to strengthen legal protections for those at risk of FGM. The new protection order available means our public services and our courts are able to focus on the need to protect those persons at risk or those who have already suffered from FGM being carried out on them. Building on the experience in other jurisdictions in the UK and reflecting on the support in our consultation, this is an effective and proven approach to reducing risk to potential victims. To support the new protection orders, the bill places a duty on ministers to issue statutory guidance on protection orders and also a power to issue guidance on FGM more generally. We intend to focus our efforts on ensuring that this guidance is developed with community input at every single step, and that we are guided by what women and girls need from their public services. This is absolutely critical for me. It's nothing about us without us, which is a term that I use often, but I mean it. On that note, I'd like to bring my opening remarks to a conclusion, Presiding Officer, because I think we've said everything we need to say today. But I want to thank those both within this chamber today and out with the chamber who have worked closely with the government over the last 18 months to help get us to this point. I would like to thank the Equalities and Human Rights Committee under the leadership of Ruth Mcguire, which undertook a significant level of detailed and thoughtful scrutiny. This included working closely with community members with lived experiences to allow them to tell their story, and I know every member of that committee were personally touched by the stories that they heard. They visited frontline services to understand how protecting women and girls from FGM happens on the ground, and they took evidence from a range of experts and organisations. Expert, detailed and very valuable scrutiny. I would like to commend the convener and members of the committee for their very thoughtful and considered work in this area, which has undoubtedly helped to ensure that we have the strongest possible legislation. Above all, I would like to thank those organisations and experts who have taken the time to share with myself and this Parliament their deep expertise in these matters. Organisations like Just Right Scotland, the Multicultural Family Base, the Shakti Women's Aid, Sahelia, Community Info Source, Amina Muslim Women's Resource Centre, the Kenyan Women in Scotland, Dundee International Women's Centre, as well as Dr Emma Jackson and Judy Wasage of the Glasgow Caledonia University, who work hard to ensure that the voices of women and girls are better heard in our policy making in this place. And I would especially like to thank Nena Bojang, a courageous survivor of the FGM and community activist who stood with me just outside the Parliament less than a year ago when we launched the bill. She says at the time that if just one girl did not have to experience what she had to, then this bill would be worth it. Presiding Officer, I am confident that if this Parliament votes to put this bill into law today, then we will be protecting more women and girls than we were yesterday, and that we will be one step further towards our goal of ultimately preventing and eradicating female genital mutilation. Thank you.
Before I call Michelle Ballantyne, can I remind those who are down to speak to press the request to speak buttons, please? And can I say we've got a few minutes in hand, so if anyone does want to intervene, I do have time to allow that to happen. Michelle Ballantyne for around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I am pleased to be able to speak on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives this evening as we bring this bill to a close and hopefully push it through Parliament at the end of the day. I have spoken previously in this chamber about my own personal experience of having to hand over a baby as a nurse that was being taken out of the country to experience FGM. It's played on me most of my life, and for that reason alone, I welcome this bill's arrival and hope that it will go on to prevent that ever happening to anybody else again. The intentions of this bill are indeed admirable, and it is a symbol of the things that this Parliament can achieve when all parties come together. But I have to say the bill on its own won't be enough. It's also important that awareness is raised around the bill to ensure that it has effect. As Police Scotland remark in their submission, it is imperative that clear guidance must be put in place for the broad spectrum of individuals or organisations in order that any potential breach of the conditions is effectively policed. And the same point applies to ensuring a strong level of communication with communities where there have been previous cases of FGM. If people are to report the crime of FGM, it is vitally important that they understand the implications of these orders and where the law stands now on this issue. Without that key effort, all the legislation in the world will not have any effect in bringing more cases to court or ensuring those prosecutions are successful, or perhaps more importantly, preventing it even coming to that stage in the first place. I know the Scottish Government have been active on this issue through the group implementing the National Action Plan, but I do feel it is worth repeating, as it is the only way we will succeed in eradicating this vile practice. Deputy Presiding Officer, I want to make a mention of the Scottish Conservative amendments to this legislation too. The Conservatives have always been highly supportive of this legislation, but as my colleague Ruth Davison just outlined, we did have some concerns in terms of the practical and technical considerations involved in the bill. And I'd like to take a moment to pay tribute to my colleague Oliver Mandel, who sadly wasn't able to be here to speak to his amendments, but he did put in a lot of work, very much around trying to represent the views and experiences of those who gave evidence, which of course they did so very bravely on what is a very difficult subject to talk about. And he was very keen that those views were incorporated and that they made it to the face of the bill and provided the kind of support that they indeed had asked for. But we do accept, as Ruth Davison said during the amendment discussion, that the government has implemented the changes we sought to make in their principles. And while the bill isn't perfect, I am glad to see the amended bill has provided for greater support than originally planned. Because at the end of the day, support and communication are the keys behind this. If this bill is going to be successful, I do hope the government will expand their activities in this area and so that it keeps pace with the requirements of this piece of legislation, because women who go through this do need a vast amount of support, not only personally in terms of managing their lives, but if we are going to prosecute or take people to court as a result of this, they're going to need an inordinate amount of support and protection so that they can continue to live within their communities. Presiding Officer, I would like to raise the subject of preventative offences. When giving evidence to the Equalities Committee, Police Scotland have noted that there is a potential gap in the legislation regarding additional preventative offences where persons have in their possessions items indicative of intending to carry out FGM. And while I recognise that in some cases it may be hard to discern whether these items may be used for carrying out FGM, particularly where there are ceremonies of a more ritualistic kind, it will probably be clear that the potential offender intends to commit a crime, much as somebody carrying drug paraphernalia suggests another type of behaviour. I think it would be worth exploring these issues in the guidance that will be issued to FGM, to police, organisations and the public, so that people can recognise equipment indicative of FGM wherever they see it, and understand that there are reporting mechanisms available. Whether we needed a full provision in the bill was perhaps a different question, but until we have stronger data on the way FGM is conducted, it would probably have been unwise to include a potentially far-reaching amendment liable to abuse. On a final note, I wish to touch upon a point made by the Law Society of Scotland in their briefing for today, and which I mentioned a moment ago. They ask how the bill's success and effectiveness will be measured once it has been implemented, particularly given how low conviction rates have been in the past. A robust way of collecting this information will be useful not only to improve reporting procedures, but to demonstrate the bill's efficacy. This will be an important consideration going forward, and one I would urge the ministers to look at and report back to Parliament on in due course. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Conservatives are fully supportive of this bill and support the direction taken by the Scottish Government here. As I said earlier, my colleagues have laid out this afternoon, it needs to be a strong, comprehensive piece of legislation that is supported by the right training, the right guidance and the resources to back it up. And ultimately, we must absolutely support the victims and those who are at threat of this really terrible crime, because although many of us have never experienced it or don't have it experienced it within our families, for those who do, it is absolutely life-destroying. So can I just say thank you for bringing it forward. I presume and hope it will go through tonight, and I hope it will make a big difference to those women out there. Thank you.
Before I call Pauline McNeill, just to let the Chamber know that we have fewer speakers than expected when the debate was timed, so it's likely that decision time will be a bit early. And I call on Pauline McNeill. Around 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to speak for Scottish Labour. And I want to begin by thanking Oliver Mandel, Ruth Mcguire and Mary Fee and the committee for being excellent parliamentarians and doing the work that you would expect them to do, but I think it's of a high quality. I also want to put on record my thanks to Angela Constance and her previous Ministerial and to Christina Mckelvey, who is taking this bill through so ably. And of course, the protection of women and girls is something that is universally of concern to all of us. I haven't previously been involved in the debate, but I have followed it from its outset. Because we know that an estimated 1 in 20 girls and women in the world have undergone some form of female genital mutilation, and according to figures from the UN, that is. And in 2020 alone, there are 4.1 million girls around the world who are at risk of undergoing female genital mutilation. The United Nations is calling for a complete ban, and rightly so, on FGM and want to see the practice end worldwide by 2030, but it did strike me that there's another 10 years of this brutal crime, and I'd hope that the UN might be able to bring that date a bit further forward. It is nearly always carried out on minors and is a violation of rights of girls. Female genital mutilation has absolutely no health benefits. It harms girls and women because it interferes with the natural functions of their bodies. There is a ban in Scotland, and it's also illegal to help someone commit FGM as well as take someone out of the country to undergo FGM. This legislation is vitally important as it provides increased protection for those girls at increased risk of being under pressure to undergo this abhorrent and dangerous practice. I followed carefully the amendments this afternoon taken by the Minister on the particular question of anonymity, an absolutely vital aspect of the legislation to protect women and girls from future harm. The bill will allow a court to make a protection order protect a person at risk of being subjected. And so, therefore, Labour is delighted to support the principles and will vote at stage 3 tonight. Doctors in Scotland have treated victims of FGM on more than 230 occasions over the 2 years of 2017 and 2018. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde said that it had identified women with FGM on at least 138 occasions over this period. And NHS Lothian, covering Edinburgh, said that there were 93 occasions where it was noted. Quite shocking that we still face this in Scotland. Dr Duncan McCormick, consultant in public health medicine at NHS Lothian, has pointed out it is a form of abuse, gender-based violence, and has serious short and long-term and physical and psychological consequences. All survivors have appalling stories about what's happened to them, and I know members have shared these horrible stories in the Parliament chamber before. I just want to finish on this one. Leisha tells her story. I was sent to Guinea for the summer. I was mutilated along with my baby sister. She was 9, I was 11. After the circumcision, I didn't know what happened exactly, but she died. She was my best friend. After the ritual, I was placed in a room with other girls and men not allowed to see us. I remember not seeing my family for days. I can't remember exactly how long. When I finally returned home and saw my family, and they were happy and proud that I was finally a woman. Sex is painful and I hate it. I hate being touched. It feels like rape every time. I cry inside. I cry out loud. My husband does not care because it does not hurt him. I had type 3 FGM and it was reopened after we were married. This kind of pain is typical of a survivor of FGM, and the story shows that some even die from the procedure. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I'm delighted that the Scottish Government has accepted the recommendations of the committee to support the statutory guidance with the appropriate professional training so that FGM protection orders are used appropriately and implemented effectively. And I think Michelle Ballantyne makes an important point about the education that's required in order to accompany the protection order and the crime that we now have in Scots law. This enhanced protection should be vital in helping to protect vulnerable girls from this life-changing and threatening practice. I'm delighted that we will be voting for this at stage 3 tonight. It is a global issue, an issue across the world. Scotland has done the right thing. I think we can say that we have done everything in our power to protect girls, but we know that we need to champion this issue across the globe. Thank you.
Call Alex Cole-Hamilton for around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'd like to start as Deputy Convener of the Equalities and Human Rights Committee by offering my sincere thanks to the clerks, the witnesses and the organisations who took us through this very sensitive but very important bill. Deputy Presiding Officer, I think this bill is a monument to the strength of our democracy, that it comes even in the teeth of the worst of international crises. The business of public policy, the business of government must continue. And this is an example of a bill that may only affect a very, very small few of our fellow citizens, but they are, by nature, a very vulnerable few. It is an indictment of our efforts to realise gender equality and the rights of women that we have to pass an act like this in Scotland in 2020. It typifies the cultural practice of female genital mutilation, typifies men's attempts to exert power and control over women that has existed for eons, and it's time that we finally stamp that out. And with this bill, we are extending a layer of protection onto many layers of protection, but it is a vital one. The Minister is quite right to say in her opening remarks that this is a hidden practice, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and we shouldn't look at our culture and our country and think that we've got it right and that these acts of savagery or barbarism, I withdraw that word, that's a terrible word to use, but that these acts are in any way appropriate in our country, and they do happen, and we have some statistics on that. Globally, we see 3 million girls in any given year that this applies to. And in Scotland, we have 350 babies born each year, girls to mothers from countries where female genital mutilation takes place, where it is the cultural norm. And it is the teeth of this bill around the Female Genital Mutilation Protection Order, in the words of Lethan Bartholomew, which give it its absolute teeth. He's from the FGM Centre, and it gives women agency and power, not only to take a stance and protect herself, but also to protect her child. And I think those words really struck home to me as we heard them in evidence, and it has been said several times in debates around this bill, that it gives agency and power to women. It reverses what I think that the practice of FGM has sought to do in the millennia that it has been practiced, in giving women the power to defend themselves against the brutality of men. Until this point in our history, there has not been any real and legal impediment to the practice. We have not been able to stop babies or children being taken overseas, or even it happening to them at home, because it is such a hidden practice, because it is such a sensitive practice that people will go to great lengths to cover up. I welcome the distance the government has gone, as I said in our discussion over the stage 3 amendments around the issue of anonymity. It is vital that we allow anonymity for girls and young women in these cultures to come forward, because by nature they are very vulnerable. They have perhaps a great sense of shame about putting their hand up and saying that they don't want it to be happening to them, and they may fear ostracization if their name is known in the wider communities. But I think we have got to a point where those women are protected. Finally, can I say that the implementation of this bill will be absolutely critical to getting it right. Only any bill is only as good as its implementation phase, and I very much welcome the efforts the government is going to plan focus groups in affected communities to shape pathways and structures around it. But can I finish by reiterating my thanks to everyone who participated in this bill, not least the organisations like Sohelia, and Sohelia who are becoming more and more involved in the work of this Parliament as they help us to help marginalised groups. And I commend this bill to the Chamber. Thank you.
Now call Christina McKelvey to wind up the debate. If you could take us to decision time, please, at 10:02.
Oh, God, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm really pleased to be closing this debate today on the stage 3 of the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill. And Alec Cole-Hamilton in his open remarks said that this was a hidden practice, but one we know that actually happens, therefore we shouldn't think that it doesn't. And the reason why we know this is the two stories that we heard today from both Michelle Ballantyne and Pauline McNeill. Michelle Ballantyne talked about the baby girl that she had to hand back when she knew that baby was at risk. This bill will protect that baby now and protect a professional like Michelle Ballantyne in her role. And Pauline McNeill talked about that wee girl's story. For some wee girls, they're taken to a birthday party, they're taken to an outing by an auntie or a granny, and they don't know what's coming to them. And that's why it may be hidden, but we know these stories, and these stories are the reason why we are doing what we are doing. There was a couple of really key parts in everybody's speeches where they wanted some more information. Michelle Ballantyne specifically asked about data collection. That's something that we have taken on board through the process of this, and I've already committed to developing a data collection strand of work through our Fgm action plan, the National Action Plan work that we're doing in partnership with health and other organisations who are relevant. Michelle Ballantyne also asked about Fgm equipment, which was something that was raised with me at the beginning of this whole process. And we did do some work with Police Scotland on this. We don't need a new offence for it because that will already be caught by the law and it being an offence to attempt to break a Fgm protection order, and that includes the carrying of the equipment in order to do that. So Police Scotland already have powers to do this. Yeah.
Michelle Ballantyne.
Can I ask for a slight clarification on that? Because my understanding was that if somebody was stopped in possession of equipment, they couldn't be prosecuted for that. That they had to actually have done something to prosecute. So could I just check that?
So yeah, if we pass the law today in the purpose of the work of the Fgm protection order, if we know that person is using that equipment to either carry out Fgm or to attempt to carry out Fgm, they will be convicted. It will be a criminal conviction. So we have got that covered off. Okay, hopefully that reassures you. We can talk more about it if you want. The other issue that lots of people raised in their contributions today was around about guidance, and I want to give some reassurance around guidance and what we want to do with guidance. And I'd like to draw the Chamber's attention to page 12 of the Year 3 report, which highlights what the sets of guidance will include. Both sets of guidance will set out the policy and legal context for the work on Fgm. The guidance on protection orders will describe the order, set out the roles and responsibilities and cover relevant matters such as application processes, costs and access to legal aid. And I want to say something about legal aid as well, because that was raised at stage 2. And at that point, we looked at where can we ensure that access to legal aid is given to someone who is accessing an Fgm protection order. And Presiding Officer, I'd like to inform the Chamber that at stage 2 I did implement the regulation change to the legal aid list to ensure that Fgm protection orders were covered on it. And that would mean that people would get access to legal aid as well. The other part of the guidance on Fgm generally will provide a comprehensive summary of issues around Fgm and set out actions for Chief Executive, Directors and Senior Managers to whom the guidance will apply. Both sets of guidance will be shaped through very close community engagement and work with stakeholders, utilising the expertise of members of the Fgm National Implementation Group. And that work will commence immediately following royal assent. The other issues that were raised with me today that were incredibly important by all of the speakers were around implementation and how we will do that. So following royal assent, The work will be complemented by the formal consultation on draft guidance covering FGM protection orders and FGM generally later in 2020, should we have the space to do that, given the current climate in which we're all facing right now. But it is our intention to do that formal consultation and give the stakeholders again their opinions and parliamentarians their opinions to ensure that the implementation of the orders and the guidance for it matches what we want to see being done. So to assist with the effective operation of future statutory guidance in FGM, we will work with stakeholders to ensure that the court training adequately reflects the position on FGM, including the updated legislation. And taking this work forward, we will engage with communities at the outset and of the process and ensure that the guidance in particular reflects the needs of women and girls. And as I said, in relation to that on legal aid, there was a question asked about legal aid, about whether an individual, a child or legal aid would be normally subject to testing of the income of the parents, but only where it is not unjust and inequitable to do so. We suspect that in all cases that will be the case, so legal aid would be ordinarily available to anyone accessing that. But given FGM protection orders would often, maybe not always, involve consideration of restrictions on parents, we think it highly likely that such means testing would always be unjust and inequitable, and in these circumstances legal aid would be granted. And at stage 2, I indicated that I had instructed the preparations of the regulations, as I said, because that's the urgency of the matter, and these regulations will proceed as part of the implementation process of the bill. Presiding Officer, it's vital to emphasise that this bill is one part of our overall holistic approach to preventing and eradicating FGM. I know that everybody in their contributions wanted to make sure that we took that forward. Michelle Ballantyne in particular said legislation's not enough. We know that. But it's something that we can use in order to prevent and protect. But culture change, understanding, support and working with stakeholders and communities is one of the main ways that we want to do that. We've been doing it through our National Implementation and Action Plan, and we want to make sure we can continue that work. Last month, we just published our Year 3 Progress Report on our Action Plan to prevent and eradicate FGM, and I'm pleased to see that we are making good progress. And I would hope that people would go and have a look at that Year 3 report. It's got some good reading in it and tells us all the direction that we want to go in. But I do want to pay tribute to and recognise the hard work and dedication of our third sector partners in helping to drive that progress. Organisations who are doing vital work to raise awareness, challenge attitudes and support women and girls alongside the legislative measures that we will take will make the change that we all want to see. And I do want to commend frontline workers in the police, health, social work, who are all supporting women and girls going forward. We will continue to work together with stakeholders and communities and making every effort to build a Scotland where women and girls at risk of harm can be equally safe. And that means that wee girl that Polly McNeill spoke about, and it means that baby that Michelle Ballantyne spoke about as well. That's who this is all about. Presiding Officer, the abhorrent form of gender-based violence has impacted on nearly 200 million women and girls worldwide, as I said. And we know that there are those in Scotland who have been subject to it, and there are those at risk of it. One of the things that I wanted to do in issuing statutory guidance to bodies and other issues like that was to make sure that that person-centred approach was absolutely at the heart of everything that we need to do here. As a government, as a parliament, we must send a very, very strong message that FGM in Scotland will not be tolerated, that you will be believed, that you will be supported, you will be listened to, and we will look after you and protect you. And we need to take practical action to build on existing protections so that the risk of FGM taking place at all is reduced. The FGM Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill does both of those things. In future, girls and women can be better protected from harm, and importantly, FGM protection orders can be used to stop potential perpetrators of FGM in their tracks. Presiding Officer, when I launched this bill just outside this Parliament, just short of a year ago, I launched it with a woman called Nene Bojang, and if you haven't heard her story, you don't want to actually hear her story because it's absolutely horrifying, but at every step of the way in my work in this bill, I've had her front and foremost in my mind, like Michelle Ballantyne with that baby, like Polly McNeill with that wee girl, like the conversation I had with John Finney about the parties that sometimes we girls think they're going along to and how abhorrent that is. Those people are the people in front of our minds. There are Scottish citizens. There are wee girls. And this bill, passed in law today, will protect them all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our Stage 3 debate on the FGM Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill. The next item of business is point of order. Joan McAlpine.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We all appreciate the steps that you and your team have taken to help Parliament continue to do its work while putting safety measures in place for MSPs and workers during the COVID-19 crisis. However, while we are all, as MSPs, advising the public to maintain social distancing, that same public can see on their television screens members of Parliament crammed next to each other in the chamber less than a metre apart, even though some members are already absent and self-isolating. Can you therefore ask yourself, the Business Bureau and the corporate body to consider whether to put in place measures to ensure that MSPs maintain a safe distance in Parliament to protect not just their own health, but to contain the spread of the disease and to send a clear message to the general public about the importance of social distancing? Thank you.
Can I thank Joan McAlpine for advance notice of her point of order, and can I confirm that members of the corporate body and the Bureau are very conscious of health matters such as this and the importance. In fact, the Bureau considered this very matter this afternoon. As I outlined on Tuesday at the close of business, all our decisions are consistent with public health advice and are designed to minimise the impact of COVID-19 with a view to safely and sustainably delivering essential parliamentary business. In relation to attendance in the Chamber, while I do not wish to prevent members from participating in business, I am content that members are not required to be present in the Chamber unless they are participating in the current item of business. I am confident that we have sufficient capacity in the Chamber to allow members to maintain a safe distance, and I would invite members to apply their own common sense on this matter. Could we move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of revised business motion 21311 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau, setting out a revision to Tuesday's business. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I have no indication of any other member that wishes to speak on this motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 21311 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. And I would just, thank you, that is agreed. I would just note that that means that we will start business on Tuesday at 1:30 rather than 2. So we start, time for reflection will be 1:30 on Tuesday. Now, I am minded to accept a motion without notice under Rule 11.2.4 to bring forward decision time to now. Could I invite the Minister to move such a motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that decision time be brought forward to now. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. So there's one question at decision time today. The question is that motion 21279 in the name of Christina Mckay on the stage on the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Bill be agreed. Are we all agreed? No, sorry, I beg your pardon. This is stage 3 and we will have to move to a vote, and members should press their voting buttons now. The result of the vote on motion 21279 in the name of Christina Mckay is yes 84. There were no votes against, there were no abstentions. The motion is agreed and the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill is passed. That concludes decision time and I close this meeting.